Welcome, everyone. My screen keeps going like this because I've got it on an ottoman. And I just bought this new camera that is sitting on the top of the laptop screen, and it's very heavy. So the top of my laptop keeps going like this, and then I have to keep going like this. It has a joint problem. So welcome everyone to tonight's Spring Rights Literary Festival event. Thank you so much for being here. I am Robin Schwartz. I am the Community Arts Partnerships Program and Grant Director. We are in Ithaca, New York, and we serve Tompkins County. And the Spring Rights Literary Festival is one of our 6 annual programs. We also have a gallery called the Cap Art Space in downtown Ithaca, and we have 6 grant programs. We have distributed $5.5 million over the past 30 years to individual artists and local not-for-profits doing arts events. It's really impressive. I invite you to check out all that we do at our website, artspartner.org. I'm going to put that in the chat after I finish talking. And I'll also put the link to springrights.org in the chat. We've had 40 events. Many of them were taped, and you could see the taped events at the website. And there are 2 more workshops coming up. Thursday is From Page to Stage. It's a whole bunch of local theater professionals talking about taking a script to the stage. It only has like 18 people enrolled in it, and it's going to be fabulous. So I hope you consider going to that. And then on Sunday, June 26th, Brenna Fitzgerald is teaching a workshop called Writing from the Body. It's about mindfulness exercises, and it's traditionally been one of the most popular workshops, except for this one, in the Spring Rights Literary Festival. So some housekeeping. Please stay on mute. Please use the chat heavily for questions and comments. It's the way that we see engagement in a Zoom event like this one, so Zoom chatting is most welcome. And by the way, if you're not from Tompkins County, tell us where you're from right now in the chat, because that's always really, really fun to see. And it's kind of one of the things that I really like about Zoom, that people can now attend from all over the world. The bathrooms are down the hall. Take off whenever you need to. And I am going to send everyone who attended a Spring Rights event multiple choice Google survey probably tomorrow. If you can fill it out, that would be amazing, because what I'm going to ask you in this survey is, how did you hear about this event? I spend money in a lot of places for advertising. It would be really cool for me to find out which of those never got noticed, so that I can give more money to the artists. So if you see that survey, I'm also going to have 3 $25 prize incentives for filling it out, because I know what motivates people. I'd like to thank our wonderful Spring Rights sponsors. They are Ithaca College, Wegmans, M&T Bank, CFCU Community Credit Union, the Odyssey Bookstore, and the Ithaca Marriott. We receive grant support from New York State Council on the Arts, Poets and Writers, and Tompkins County Tourism. Our media sponsors are Ithaca Voice, WITH Radio, and WSKG. I'm going to quickly look in the chat to see where people are. Ohio, Texas, Coldersport, PA, Broome County, Oakland, California, Seattle, wow, Baltimore, New Jersey, Rochester, South, that's very cool, South Florida, really, really cool. Hi from Ithaca, Kate. And so I'm now going to turn the mic over to Christopher DeWan to start this workshop tonight. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Well, I'm used to not having self-view on, and all of a sudden there's my face. Thank you so much for coming. I'm relatively new to town, so I think I didn't expect anyone to come. I'm saying that because I'm relatively new to town, and I met Robin sort of early in my journey, and as Robin does, she was like, "What do you do?" And I said, "I write flash fiction," and she quickly enlisted me to do work for her. That's what Robin does, right? So I came up with the idea for this workshop. I didn't even come up with the idea for the workshop. I came up with a title for the workshop, which is Tell the Truth, but Tell It Scant. And I liked the title so much that I had to come up with a workshop. So I knew that I didn't want to do it on my own. So I enlisted the help of 2 flash genius writers, both of whom are at least sometime Ithacans. Casey and Leonora. So thank you so much for throwing in on this with me. I'm really excited about the format of this workshop, and I just want to let you know what that format is. What I asked them to do, and I'll be doing the same thing, is sharing a very short piece of writing that we wrote, and then talking about a craft decision that we made in the writing of that story, talking about it briefly, and then turning it into a prompt so that you can generate some new work around that craft idea. And I don't know what the other two writers are doing today, so I'm going to be writing along with everybody else. And I'm pretty excited. The first writer presenting today is Leonora, so I am going to turn the mic over to her.
I could do it.
Hey everyone, thank you guys so much for coming. I'm going to start by reading my story. And if anyone wants to follow along while I read aloud, I'm going to put the link for the story in the chat. This story is called Fire Ocean. My father comes from fire. At night, I can hear his steam twisting his irises into candle wicks. My mother stands in doorways watching. Come to bed, Jeff, my mother says. Just a minute, Rhonda, my father says. He dials up the Phil Collins paces. Dad loves his Phil Collins. He also loves Britney Spears and bad kung fu movies and slipping cigarettes to my friends, slipping and lighting them with his tongue like magic. Did I mention we're 16? The music dims, my father sits. This is the worst, his blue-black silence. The house rocks in his slow burn rocks and rocks. I imagine him gone, Mom hosing down the place in a pair of red stilettos. She pretends she doesn't see. The handprints flaming down his back, those teeth marks from other women. My mother comes from water. She is the pair of cool hands that coax my father from burning rooftops. Her body, the safety net he falls into at the bottom. He sees her most in absence, the laundry that doesn't get done, the rind of soap that hardens in the bathtub drain when she leaves to visit Aunt Linda for a week. She dissolves in corners, watches my father parade in restaurants. His fire melts her, disappears her inside his body. I am the smoke that comes from my father's flame. I whistle out of windows and coil down the stairs. I slip shapeless into dive bars. I let wannabe married rock stars feel me up in bathroom stalls and gutters. I am my mother's ocean. I am her water, bending to Bowie on the jukebox, to the smell of weed and wedding rings, and to long blue bodies, to what they want, to what they tell me to do, against the wall or over a graffiti toilet, to lips and thighs and hands. I am the mist they wash off lips and thighs and hands. I let them do what they want. Sometimes I sneak back home and hear Dad pacing, his long legs pacing, steam pushing, the cigarette melting in his lips. Smoke ghosts against my window. It massages it with words. Go to bed, won't tell Mom. So sorry, wasn't ready for all this. This. 3 stick figures in his smoky kindergarten scratch. Me, my mother, him. So I've been experimenting with writing about the characters in this story for quite some time. In many ways, the characters are a bit cliched, right? You have a dad who's a philanderer, who cheats on his wife, a mom who's passive and who bends to whatever the dad wants, basically, and the daughter who's a bit of a mix between the two. Whenever I tried writing the story in a realistic way, meaning without magic or surrealism, the story and characters just didn't feel memorable to me. Something felt missing, perhaps because we've seen these types of characters many times before. So the question is, how do we take familiar characters or a familiar subject, something like infidelity or falling in or out of love, and make it fresh? One way is by using magic. At the time of writing this, I was reading a lot of flash fiction, and I was so impressed with how writers took characters and subjects I'd seen before, at least in certain ways, and made them new. One way they did this was through surrealism. They took a metaphor for an experience and literalized it through a magical device. So what does that mean to literalize a metaphor through a magical device? In my story, the character of the dad has a fury personality. I decided to use magic to represent this. He's literally made of flame. His irises, for example, resemble candle wicks, and he can light cigarettes with his tongue. The mom, meanwhile, comes from water, an element that is fluid and that bends, the way that she bends to the dad. The daughter is smoke and steam, a mix of both her parents. She can whistle out the window the way that smoke can. The way the characters behave, active and fury for the dad, passive and fluid for the mom, a mix of the two for the daughter, is embodied through a magical device. The dad is fire, the mother water, the daughter smoke and steam. What I did in my piece isn't unique to flash fiction. One of my favorite examples of the technique I used is from the show Ally McBeal, which some of you guys might remember from the late 90s. Ally is a young female lawyer. In one scene, she's in a business meeting where, if I'm remembering right, she's being mansplained. For a moment, this otherwise realistic show takes a surreal turn. Ally is made to feel small and literally begins to shrink right in the middle of the meeting. Her sense of feeling small becomes literalized. It's not just something she feels, it's something we see manifest in her physical being. Another example of this technique of literalizing metaphor through magic is from a piece called Moth, which I'll send you the link for before the session is. The story is about teenage rebellion. The protagonist, Moth, feels different from other kids in school. This is something we've seen before, especially in movies, but what's different is how she experiences feeling different. She literally defies gravity. In school, when the teacher drones on, she escapes, not like the rest of us by daydreaming, by floating out of her classroom window. Her dreamy nature is manifested in her literally being, quote, light as a feather. In a realistic piece, one without magic, a rebellious teen might, I don't know, cut class a lot or party or try drugs. Since that's something we've seen before, it's harder to make it memorable, though not impossible. On the other hand, a story like Moth that expresses rebellion and nonconformity through magic instantly becomes fresh. So now I'm going to give you guys a prompt. There's going to be two parts to this. I want you to begin by brainstorming moments in your own life. Think back to memories that were especially poignant and impactful for you. List about 1 to 3, depending on how much time you have, and write a couple of sentences describing each. Don't worry about writing them well or using amazing language. The goal is basically just to get them down, a few sentences summarizing around 1 to 3 memories. After you write your 1 to 3 memories, I'd like you to think of what magical device could express each one. So for instance, someone who has a memory of feeling free, maybe they quit their job, for instance, might in a magical story float to the ceiling, or maybe they grow wings and fly away. This would be the surreal way of expressing that moment of freedom. Next to each of your memories, write what magical metaphor you might use to describe the memory. I'd like us to take 5 minutes and then come back, after which I'll give you the rest of the writing prompt. I'm also going to put these instructions in a summarized way in the chat. And if you have any questions, please feel free to message me in the chat. Happy writing. So let's come back at around 6:50. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for doing the brainstorming part. I hope it went well. So now that you guys have a list of between 1 to 3 memories and magical devices, I'd like you to pick the one that you're the most excited about. This should be a memory paired with the magical device that you'll use to describe that memory. For the next 5 minutes, I'd like you to start the opening paragraph to a story that describes your memory through a magical motif. Basically, in the next couple of minutes, you'll be setting up the main character and magical device in your opening sentences to the story. For example, the opening sentence of my piece was, "My father comes from fire," which sets up the dad and how he's magical. The story Moth does something similar, introducing both Moth and how she's magic. The opening line reads, quote, "Moth light as a feather, often drifted out the open classroom window as the teacher lectured on gravity and other things that meant nothing to her." So let's take another 5 minutes. I'll put the instructions in the chat, and if you guys have any questions, please feel free to message me. Let's come back at 6:56. Hey everyone. So thank you guys so much for trying out this exercise and for listening to me read my story. I hope and encourage you to keep working on your piece after the session ends at some point. And if you ever have writer's block, now you have a list of a couple of memories and magical ways to explore those memories. So now I'm going to turn the class over to our next fabulous instructor, Casey.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can all hear me okay. My name is Casey Mead-Brewer, and I'm super excited to be here with you all today. This is such an honor. And I've never taught a workshop before, so please bear with me if I'm extremely awkward. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, first of all, I should say, like, Leonora, thank you so much. That was like really fun. And I actually got something started that I feel really happy with. That's been a while. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. But so I'm going to start talking a little bit about one of my very favorite things that feels a bit unique to Flash as a genre. And I saw a question in the chat that was a little bit about like, what are the kind of rules around the length of Flash? And I will say that just real quickly, that varies a lot depending on what magazine you're submitting to. But I feel like the general rule tends to be like 1,000 words or fewer is like the Flash word count goal. But Flash as a genre can look all kinds of different ways and what kinds of stories it can tell. And one of my favorite things about it, but also one of my least favorite ways of describing it is something that I hear a lot of people call just vibes. So like stories that aren't necessarily like a full plot, quote unquote, whatever that means, or, you know, the arc feels, I don't know, a little watery for some people or something like that. And it's just kind of just vibes. We're in an atmosphere. It's, you know exactly what I mean. And, but like, it drives me a little bit crazy because, you know, I think that, you know, so many times these kinds of stories still feel weirdly satisfying. They still feel cathartic. They still feel whole. They still feel big. And so, you know, like, what does that mean? And, you know, when I think about stories and authors who I really love, who accomplish this, you know, beautifully, I think about Russell Edson's poem slash flash story, The Fight in the Meadow. I think about Leonora Carrington's story, Waiting, although that's technically like more of a short story, but we'll just like scoot past that. And I think about Carmen Maria Machado's Mary When You Follow Her, Ross Showalter's Vertigo, Jamaica Kincaid's Girl. All of these stories are very much like stories I have heard described as just vibes. They just kind of have an energy, they kind of have an atmosphere, and it's hard to pinpoint, I think, sometimes why they work so well. In truth, I think that it's this ability to tell an entire story basically kind of just through atmosphere, just through peripheral world building, just through evocation rather than like a hard direct plot that I think is one of flash fiction's like most beautiful, exciting strengths. And I think that it is starting to get a little bit more fanfare, you know, especially as more magazines are starting to accept flash fiction. And then not only that, but then we're starting to see the emergence of flash markets that look directly at these kinds of plotless stories like The Cafe Are Real or Tails and Feathers, which is actually opening for submissions for its first issue on June 30th. So check it out, they're really cool. But I'm gonna read you a quick little piece of mine called A Prancing Light, which was published with Twin Pies Literary, which is a cool place because their whole vibe is around basically things that kind of feel like they could exist in the world of Twin Peaks. And so, let's see here. I'm gonna put the link. That was a great idea, Leonora. I'm gonna steal that from you and put the link for the story in here. If anyone wants to follow along. There we go. And so basically what I encourage you to think about while I read this is thinking about not just like the story itself, because it does not have a super traditional plot for you to follow, but that more about what I was really hoping to achieve with this story would be that the atmosphere and the energy and the setting would kind of create the narrative motion. And so here we go. Thank you for bearing with me. All right. A prancing light. If you came here looking for a good time, you're going to be disappointed. There's a wolf man in the trees, and I grant you that sounds promising, but his teeth hurt and all he does is growl wetly from the darkness. There are two women arguing not far from him, holding their hair against the high wind. And at first you wonder if they'll be all right. What if they get lost or murdered or take a fall? When the lightning flashes and you glimpse their faces, yes, it's better to go back inside. Stay home and lock the doors. There's a darkness here too, yet it's easier to see things somehow. The kind of darkness that comes from turning on a bedside lamp. You'll need to plug that lamp in though. The cat keeps jumping on the cord and pulling it loose from the outlet. I just lost my place, don't tell anyone. Okay, but be careful when you reach down for it behind the nightstand. You never know. The world is a seething place. Spiders, ghosts, men under the bed, and under the men under the bed, a writhing carpet of silverfish. Quietly, the world belongs to them, and it's a world that smells like bones and salt. If you look deep enough into its fog, you'll see a prancing light, but don't follow it. Whatever you do, don't follow it. Promise me now that you won't, no matter how dark it gets. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Sorry about losing my place in there. So something that I really enjoyed about writing this piece is that sometimes when I don't really know how to get started on a story is I'll just kind of pick a setting or an atmosphere or a feeling that I really like and enjoy working with. And then I will just try to say, okay, now I need that setting, atmosphere, feeling to cause a problem. And so that's what I tried to do here with each piece of the setting. I start with the first line. If you came here looking for a good time, you're going to be disappointed. And I tried to kind of make the whole story a physical place, basically, that I'm inviting you into, but that then is immediately causing a problem. It is not what you wanted. It's not what any of us thought it would be. And then we move into the next part of the setting, which is the forest. And the forest is full of similarly, maybe freaky, disappointing things or just upsetting things you wish you hadn't seen. We move into the house. And the house is comforting, the house is safe, but the house is also dark. And then the house is also full of horrible bugs. And then the house is full of scary things. And then the scary things become bigger and bigger in your mind. And so then we kind of have this motion of it being big, becoming small, becoming intimate, becoming larger again. And at each time kind of causing a slightly new problem. And so this is probably why I like haunted houses so much, is because it's like the epitome of the setting causing the problem. And I just really adore that in stories. You can see this all through, you can see it through all the stories I listed as examples, but you can see it, kind of everywhere. You can see it in movies. This is the best part about the opening of Jaws, is that everything about the setting causes a problem there. Not just that there's sharks in the water, but when, Brody tries to go and start to warn people to stay off the beach, he can't find any signs in his office. So then he tries to go to the craft store, but there's a freaking parade that he has to get through, and everyone keeps stopping him along the way. And then when he actually gets to the craft store to get the materials to make the signs to keep people off the beach, he knocks over a bunch of stuff and he can't find what he's looking for. And there are more people there asking him questions. And basically it's just this huge catastrophe of stuff that's all just based on your setting. And so my prompt rewall would be that I'd love for you to pick either an atmosphere or a setting that you really like. And it can be as big in general as Halloween, or it could be, super specific. It could be New Orleans at night. It could be your house. It could be anything like that. And then just start trying to think up ways that it could cause problems for someone. And so we'll just go for a few minutes, and I neglected to time myself, so I really do not have any idea how much time we've got. I'm gonna guess 5 minutes. I'm gonna put that out there for Chris, and hopefully he'll nod at me, maybe. Yeah, I'm getting the thumbs up. Okay, so we'll try this for 5 minutes and we'll see where we go. So come back at, we'll say maybe 7:10, 7:11. And yeah, thank you so much.
And Casey, see a request in the chat for you for authors and titles of who you mentioned.
Oh, I'll do that while you guys write. That sounds great. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna like softly close you guys out, and thank you so much for your time and for bearing with me. And I don't know if there are anyone has any specific questions before I move things over to Chris, but I hope this was fun, and I hope it was helpful and interesting. So thank you.
And Casey, one thing we were talking about earlier that we haven't said to the whole group is after we're done at 7:30, if you have to go, please feel free to go. But I think we're going to stick around for people who have questions.
That's right.
And then we can
Perfect.
just sort of get everyone off mute and just chat.
Perfect.
Cool. Awesome. So this whole month, as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to share with everyone, I started thinking about a story I wrote called Indestructible. And the story of this story is I had a pretty clear idea of what this story was, who the people were and what the place was. And I sat down and I was like, this is going to be so easy. I'm going to write a draft. It's going to be so easy. I'll probably have it published by tomorrow. I sat down, I wrote 2,000 words and more or less got to the end of the thing that I thought was the story. If you write Flash, then you may know that 2,000 words is not an ideal length for a story. 2,000 words is it's too short to be a real grown-up short story, a New Yorker short story, which are usually like 5 to 10,000 words. Flash stories are often only 1,000 words. A lot of places you can't send a 2,000 word story. That wasn't in the moment, that wasn't the problem I was having. The problem that I was having was the story I wrote sucked. And I needed to figure out how to make it work. And I knew that I was at this junction where I could either make it a bigger story, bring in more details and really flesh it out and see if I could bring it up to sort of real short story length. Or if I could do that thing that Flash people do, which is how can I distill this story, make it concise, and figure out what the kernel of the story is. So I took this 2,000 word story and I started cutting. And I kept cutting and I kept cutting and I kept cutting and I got it down to 80 words. And then I sent it out and I actually did publish that story faster than any story I've ever published. It got accepted, I think, the day I sent it out, which was uncanny and strange. The reason I'm saying all this is no one has ever, I've taught a bunch of Flash workshops. I've taken a lot of Flash workshops, and I've never heard anyone try to teach how to make a story short. It's a Flash workshop. I promised you a workshop on Flash. And I had all these notions for different writing prompts I could do that would help you write stories, but they wouldn't help you write Flash stories. How do you do that? How do you make a story concise? How do you make it short? And I think the crux of it, as I started thinking about this, was it's less about making it short and it's more about making it sudden. How do you make a story sudden? How does it happen suddenly? So I'm not going to read you the 2,000 word turned into 80 word short story. I'm going to cheat. And these are not my favorite stories that I've written, but these are the shortest stories that I have written. And I'm going to read 3. That's how short they are. The first one's called Conestoga Wagon. When he lost his job at Best Buy, Dad packed all our things into a Conestoga wagon and we crossed the border into Canada in search of the American dream. That's it. That's the whole story, in case you were waiting. Second story, which I've never actually read out loud to anyone, is called Bride of Frankenstein. Here's the story. During the sex scandal, the Bride of Frankenstein stood by her man, silent and strong. And the third story, I'm really pushing my luck here on time. The third story is called Sacramento. Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into some other one. So I picked these because I said, not because they're my favorite. They're so short that you have to sort of, I have to, as I'm writing them and as I'm trying to convince somebody to publish them, I have to ask, is it a story? If it's that short, is it a story? And then I have to start unraveling the whole larger question of what is a story and what isn't a story. And I was thinking about all this as I was trying to figure out what I was going to ramble to you guys about today. And I fell back on some of the conventional wisdoms that we all have about what makes a story a story. And the one that you hear probably most often is a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I'm not sure if that's true for Flash or not. I'm not sure. It has a first word and it has a last word. So it has a beginning and an end. But is a Flash only a middle? Is a Flash only an end? So now I'm like really sort of unraveling it as I'm trying to figure out what to say. This whole thing that I'm going to talk about is just me talking about what it is I was thinking about talking about. Does a Flash have a beginning, a middle, and an end? Or is it just sort of one piece of that that hints at the other pieces? Maybe. Then I started thinking about what writers call the point of attack of the story. So where does the story begin? Where should you start your story? And the conventional wisdom is you should start it in media res, in the middle of things. It means the action of the story should already have started by the time we get to page 1. You want to start your story at the last possible point. And so again, if I were trying to teach concision, then the question is, what is the last possible point that I can enter into these stories? So I looked at these 3 one-sentence stories that I just read you. Dad lost his job at Best Buy. So what I realized was all 3 of these, Dad lost his job at Best Buy, Frankenstein had a sex scandal, and she walked into some other bar. The event of the story happens before the story starts, before the text of the story starts. The big thing that happens has already happened. Dad already lost his job. Frankenstein already had a sex scandal, and she already walked into some other bar. The entirety of the story, and you can argue whether or not it is a story if it's that short, but the entirety of the story happens before. The catastrophic event that's supposed to be the crux that we build the story around happens before the story even starts. And just to see if I was completely wrong in writing these stories this way, I found what's probably the most famous Flash story. It's that Hemingway 6-word story, For Sale, Baby Shoes, Never Worn. The baby died before the story. I also found another one I like by this writer, Augusto Monterosso. The story goes, when he woke, the dinosaur was still there. I'm not sure what the catastrophe of that is supposed to be exactly, but clearly the dinosaur did arrive before the story started. And so I've realized, like, this isn't the only way to write Flash, but one way to write Flash, one way to make your stories more sudden is, can you imagine the story where the catastrophe has already happened and everything that you write is that moment right after, right after. I'm gonna really quickly, because I'm gonna share my screen. That is what I'm gonna do. Let's see here. And I am going to, can everyone see that? So again, I'm testing out my theory. Can you tell a story after the catastrophe has already happened? And so I looked up what are some of the award-winning photos from 2001. And a photo, a snapshot, is a story. It's a flash, right? Literally a flash, pop, flash. And I looked at these and they were stories that had already happened. But the photo is capturing the moment after. Right? That story has already happened. That story has already happened. So it's not just me. It's not just me and Hemingway and Augusto Monterosso. It's all of us and photographers. There are two other things I want to point out before I cue you up for the writing prompt. One of them is that these stories often hinge on time adverbs. After he lost his job at Best Buy, this happened. During the sex scandal, right? When he woke, the dinosaur was still there. The time adverb lets you control time. It lets you say, this has already been going on before the first sentence has even begun. And that's a really powerful tool if you want to throw someone right into the mix of it. The other thing is the thing that does happen in the present in these stories, which is somebody is realizing something. In the aftermath of what has happened, in the catastrophe, we often think of the catastrophe as the crux of the story. The crux of the story is what the person realizes after the catastrophe. And that is what the flash is when it's distilled down to its teeniest little bit. For that person, the world will never be the same. For that woman standing there in front of her burning home, her world will never be the same. So my prompt for you is I want you to write a story that begins after a catastrophe. I'm going to ask you to write very quickly. So once I cue you up, it's just simply 5 minutes of a story that begins after a catastrophe. So take a moment to find an idea. If you're already in the midst of working on a story, if you already have something in mind, then I want you to entertain the notion of what happens if you start the story at the end. That thing you thought that you were going to build up to, what happens if that already happened? If you don't have a story you're already working on, then pick any catastrophe from history or the news or your life. And catastrophe can mean large things or small things, right? If your spouse leaves, it doesn't look like much, and it's a catastrophe. And so once you have a picture in your head of some sort of catastrophe that you want to write the moment after, I want you to begin with the phrase, after it was over, ... and then just go. Zoom in on details, see what you see. See if you can see what this space looks like after it was changed by this event. See if you can see what the people look like after they were changed. Can you reveal, by revealing the details of what it looks like, can you reveal what's happened here? And can you reveal what the people have experienced and maybe how they've grown? So I'm going to say go. The goal isn't to find a complete short story with word perfect prose. The goal in this case is to find a snapshot. Find a snapshot of the moment after a catastrophe and describe it. That's all. That's all you have to do. And I'm going to start you now on this iPhone timer, which will take us to 7:29. After it was over. course, the real way to get concise stories is set a timer for 5 minutes. That is about time, but I wanted, first of all, to thank everyone for coming. It's such a pleasure to see all of your faces, but then it's even more of a pleasure to see the top of everyone's head when you start writing, because it means you're actually like in it and writing, which is awesome. I've roped my cohort here into lingering a little bit longer. If people want to chat or have questions or just things you want to talk about, either via the chat or if you want to come off mute and just talk. But I'm going to just trust everyone to manage the free for all of that if it comes to that. And if people don't have questions, then right now, before people log off, I'll just say thank you for coming. And it's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
So feel free to just go on mute and ask some questions. I know you got them. Is there such a thing? Is there such a thing as a flash play?
Maybe that's a question for the event tomorrow.
Oh, I sent it to you already in your private email.
Maybe you can perform it tomorrow.
Mm.
If you had a story where the person did not get smarter at the end, didn't learn anything, would then it depend on atmosphere, I guess?
It's funny, like the three of us don't have like a system for how we're going to answer. So the first thing that I'm going to say, and then I'm going to like, is all of us solve it differently, right? So we'll probably all have different answers, and our sort of aesthetics might dictate, right? Some person might want atmosphere as their whole goal, and other people might want plot as their whole goal, and it depends. And for me, I often think that the failure to learn is a kind of resolution, right? So you can see that the person was presented the opportunity and then it doesn't happen. And that's an end, because then I feel different. I see them differently. They are changed by that experience in that they have failed to grow. And often that can feel satisfying to me.
Okay.
But I would love to hear.
And I think that can also sometimes feel more authentic if somebody doesn't learn, because often in real life, we don't learn from, conflict or things that happen to us. I had a great teacher of flash fiction, Kathy Fish, who some of you might be familiar with, who talks about how there should be movement in a story, even if there's not a very tidy narrative arc. So someone doesn't necessarily have to, learn a lesson at the end of a story, but there should be something that shifts from beginning to end, even if it's something subtle. So it might not be that the person had a great epiphany or learned, but there should be something that's different from the end than there was from the beginning. I had another teacher, Marie-Helene Bertino, who talks how if you take away something from a story, you should give it something else, which maybe doesn't apply in the case of this question. But if you, for instance, like if you had a story that didn't have strong characters or a plot, you might want to give it something else, like strong language, like it could be a very language focused story or a very atmospheric story. So if you're taking away things, you should give something in compensation and really focus on that. I might be paraphrasing in her incorrectly. That's somewhat my take too.
Yeah, I would just add to both of that. I agree with Chris and Leonora completely, and I really appreciate just a sense of motion being more important than necessarily like a lesson or some kind of clear like super cathartic full ending, or super like really intense full clear arc. But that I think I tend to think of, it's a really excellent flash piece if there's a sense of motion, but then I think there are lots of ways to think about motion. I think that can be simply, an expectation is can be a sense of surprise, something that simply feels that just changes the way, hopefully changes the way a reader feels about a certain thing. And I think sometimes, this is how the way poems operate. I think that, a lot of poems can teach us a lot about how to do flash in a beautiful way. So
can I ask, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I ask, what's the difference then between flash and poetry? Because a lot of this, I'm new to flash. This is a whole new concept to me. And it seems kind of appropriate for our culture currently, our literary culture that is embracing the tweeting and the texting and everything in little bits and snippets. But what's the difference between flash fiction and poetry? Because I don't see it. I don't get it.
I think that's a really
Oh, go for it, Leonora.
Oh, I think that's an excellent question. And I think sometimes the distinction is very arbitrary, to be honest. I think in terms of prose poetry and flash, they could sometimes be seen as synonymous. I think once you have line breaks in a poem, that would differentiate it between, from something like flash. You might also argue that in a prose poem, there doesn't necessarily have to be that sense of movement or change from beginning to end, while in flash fiction there should be. But overall, I would argue that the boundaries are very nebulous and amorphous, and it's really subjective and, up to the discretion of the writer or the reader.
And I'd add, I think blood feud causes a blood feud as people try to distinguish themselves against the other side. But I think ultimately it also comes down to partly it doesn't matter, right? So it matters insofar as you're sending it somewhere to get it published. So it matters to the editor what they think is poetry and what they think is fiction and where they draw the line. And sometimes I've told people, it's like they've sent a flash story out to 20 places or 50 places or whatever. And I'm like, send it to poetry places, and then they get it published. And I've told them the opposite.
So is it really just the preconceived notion of what does this piece qualify as? Is it because is flash more trendy now than poetry? Is that what's going on?
Again, from my perspective, I think it just depends on which audience is defining the trend.
Sure.
And sort of which circle you run in.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I would add, because I agree with Leonora and Chris completely. And I think that, I think a good way to think about it is oftentimes setting your readers up with the right expectations for your piece. That I think, readers are going to bring different expectations to a poem than they are to something that they are being told is prose. And so if you want readers to come to it with more of a prose feel and a prose expectation, then calling it flash is definitely going to set it up for success, whereas calling it a poem might really throw people off.
Sure, because there's preconceived notions of what a poem is.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that this works for I think this is kind of why genres exist in general, right? Is to set readers up so that they know they have an idea of what they're going to be opening in this book.
Sure.
And that's important because, because reader expectations really do oftentimes determine whether or not a story is successful. Sort of if a trailer to a movie sets you up to think a movie is going to be one thing and then it ends up being a totally different thing, doesn't necessarily mean it was a bad movie. It just didn't fit what you were hoping for. And so I think that that's definitely something to keep in mind when you're trying to shop a piece around is, does it benefit from the history of poetry being behind it, or does it benefit better from the history of prose and flash being behind it?
That's awesome. Thank you. That helps.
That was such a great answer.
Yeah.
I saw a question in the chat. Can you say more about the difference between metaphor and magical realist devices? I think with metaphor and magical realist devices, there is definitely an overlap. With the metaphor, it's a magical device that becomes real in the context of the story. It's taken for granted that it's not an abnormal thing that's happening per se, but something that's absolutely real. It's not just symbolic, but it becomes a literal thing that's expressing the experience of a character. It could also coexist besides ordinary and banal elements. So like in my story, you have this dad who turns into who's fire, but at the same time, he likes all of these prosaic things like Britney Spears and Phil Collins and Kung Fu movies. So when you're writing magic, you don't have to kind of ditch the ordinary world completely. You can have it coexist with magic. And in a way, I always really dug stories like that because they, by juxtaposing magic and the ordinary, they kind of heighten both. And the combination is a little bit strange and striking.
Thanks.
There's also a question in the chat about flash fiction versus flash nonfiction. And I forget why exactly I leaned into the flash fiction part of this when I proposed it, except that was the conversation that I started with Robin. I think the broader point is probably similar to the point that Casey made. As far as the writer is concerned, it's just that's the shape that the story wants to come out in, whether it was true or not true, right? And then the rest of it is just sort of setting up the expectations with the reader and the editor, and it's a very obviously like a very fluid space. There aren't sort of adjudicators who are saying these are the rules by which all these artists must abide. There is no money in it, which means we can do whatever we want. And which is part of the charm. So there are certainly people writing flash nonfiction, and there are people writing flash novels where the chapters are short, often standalone flash stories that are a page or two long, and people are writing memoirs in that format. No rules. So it's a sort of great forum for just saying what is the best vessel for me to put this tale into. And it can come out in any sort of shape, any length, any, right.
Absolutely. And just to jump on Chris's point there are definitely magazines that will focus on any of those specific subgenres within Flash. So if you're feeling like it's important that readers understand that your piece is nonfiction, there are definitely magazines that focus on that and will promote it that way. Like Brevity magazine comes to mind. I'm pretty sure they do exclusively memoir and nonfiction of a flash length.
There have been a couple of questions about publishing, where to publish, how to publish. I don't know if either of you want to field that, and I can look for the questions more specifically. Let's see, one of them is just how do you choose where to submit your stories? And then any suggestions for other workshops, finding a venue, building an audience.
I would say I'm going to put a link to some of my favorite Flash magazines in the chat. But I would say start by, in terms of publishing, reading stories from different magazines and seeing if your kind of tone or aesthetic, or if something about your own writing kind of matches what you're reading from these places. I would then say that then one of those places might be a really good candidate to submit to because their aesthetic might be similar. But I think just reading a lot is a great way just to both sense where to submit your own work and also to just get into the groove of writing. Like when I'm reading stuff that I'm inspired by, it really makes me want to write as well. So there's kind of a two-pronged benefit to that.
Another way to get a list of the places publishing Flash are just go to Casey's website and Leonora's website and look at all the places they're publishing. Because that will give you the greatest hits list, I think, of the
Chris's publishing list as well, I think. And I would also say, if you pick up any of the best small fiction anthologies or any of the best microfiction anthologies and check out, they list all the different magazines where those pieces originally came from. And that's a great way to see not only just a wide variety of magazines, but also to get like a little snapshot of the kinds of things they're publishing. And another great way is, I would say, is to maybe try to apply to be a reader for a magazine. That's super helpful. You know, not only does it help you be like a really good involved literary citizen, but also to kind of show you what's getting submitted right now. So.
You also get a really quick sense of what works and what doesn't if you're reading that many stories. So it makes you a better writer for sure.
There's also the Wigleaf Top 50, which lists what is the top 50 stories of the year, as well as some long listed stories. And these are stories that were published in other venues, so you can see what the other venues are, and that can give you an idea of where to submit.
And unless someone beats me to it, I'm going to grab the link and put that in the chat. And someone beat me to it. Anybody else? I think we're caught up on the comment question. So if you have a question in the comments and I've missed it, either maybe drop it back in the comments or raise your hand and we're happy to talk. And otherwise, I'm starting the countdown. Okay, I'm going to thank everyone again then. Thank you so much for coming out. It's been a fantastic joy to get to be with people tonight and talk a little about flash fiction.
And thank you, everybody, for coming. I mean, this is really great. And thank you for the generosity of the people who are